Hello, Government A students. This is Mrs. Miller, and this is the Unit 2 test review. I will be going over things that are in the test, so I highly recommend watching this video. It's good to watch the one on the essay as well, just because it's good to have an understanding of what I'm looking for, so you can do your best work and angle it towards your reader, who is me. And that way you know you're writing what I'd like you to write. One day you will be able to write, whatever you want. But at this point, you really want to write what your instructor is asking for to make sure that you get the best score you can. So I'm going to start off with this disclaimer. I've reread the test a few times, and there are some questions that are pretty tricky. So it's really important that you read them carefully, you read all of the possible answers, because some of the answers are going to seem like, oh yeah, this is it, and you're going to click on it before reading the rest of them. But half of that is right and half of it's wrong. And as time goes on, I'll slowly be rewording these questions. A lot of these were provided by Odysseyware, and I do more of the projects and things like that. But as of now, there's still very few that I've been able to reword. So what I would like you to do is just remember that take your time with these tests. And that really goes for all of your courses. The same thing happens in my economics course and my history course. So yeah, make sure you're reading the questions very carefully. Some of them are going to be written in a way that's like, oh, I wish I could remember one off the top of my head, but I can't. It'll say something that makes a lot of sense, but it'll have the name of the person, and that's what's wrong with it. So just be sure you're taking your time with these. And again, review the whole answer. Creating a government is part of what you'll be asked about. 5 things that are necessary to create a functioning government: leadership, safety of the citizens, production and provisions for health, and that's going to include things like producing a way of creating clothes. It's going to include production of food, and provisions include food as well. Law and order must be maintained. There must be some sort of understanding within the society that people are going to follow certain rules. And then goals for the future for people to rally behind. If a society is stagnant, then people won't necessarily they won't have passion of being part of it. The importance of the Greeks. And the Greeks are important because that's where we really first start seeing democracy in history. Before that, it's things like monarchs and pharaohs and just rulers that may have been very fair rulers, but rulers all the same that are not elected. So we first start seeing democracy in Athens around 400 BC. This democracy was limited in that women and slaves could not vote. It was only free men, and specifically usually Greek men. It eventually, if they were citizens, they could vote too, but just, yeah, free men. And only men who had money and property could vote. So that really limited the lower class. This was still a new thing though, so the fact that anyone could vote was a very big deal. Greeks and Romans used direct democracy. I can't speak. Greeks and Romans used direct democracy, where we use representative democracy. We usually, instead of voting on every bill ourselves, we vote in representatives who then vote on the bills for us. And we hope we vote for people who best represent our interests. Some vocabulary from the Greeks. Vocabulary, people, and cities. There was just a little of each, so I put them all into one slide. Direct democracy is the term given to Greek democracy, and that is like if a direct democracy is better for a smaller society. We are very large, the United States, and we have a very large population, so it would be very hard to have a direct democracy. Pretty much nothing would ever get accomplished. So we have the representative democracy that I spoke of in the last the last slide. But direct democracy is where you vote for each thing. And so with the Greeks, it was every free male voting citizen would vote on every issue that came up. Assembly is a group governing rules and holding authority within the Greek city-state, and that's pretty much what we would think of as like our Congress or something. Sparta was a city-state within Greece that had a very strong army. Athens used democracy, and they were very strong with their naval power. It's important to see the differences. Sparta is the one we think of, like with the movie The 300, we are Sparta. And that's the one that's strong army. Those people worked very hard to have a very strong army. They lived very sparse lives, and actually the term Spartan is a term we give to almost like a culture or a lifestyle when you have very little and you're focused on what you're doing. Like if you were a college student and you don't have things on your walls and you don't go out and party and you just do your schoolwork, that would be kind of living in a Spartan fashion, just without the army part. It would be very focused and very undistracted. And Athens, like I said, had the naval power. Athens had more of I was gonna say like more of like a community with the water. That doesn't quite sound right. Like a relationship almost. They really enjoyed having that naval power, not just for protection, but because of their religion. That's a side note, though. You don't need to know that for the test. That's just me being a history dork. Um, and Solon was an Athenian statesman. He was a reformer, and one of the years that's important to have with him is 594 BC. And oh, I always mispronounce this guy's name. Um, Clisthenes. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, and it's particularly, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it because I'm making this video. If I were just saying it in conversation, I'd probably get it right the first time. But the pressure, of course, makes me be a complete goober. He came after Solon, and he presented the Constitution in Greece in 508 BC. And this opened up voting to all free adult men and introduced the Assembly of 500, which could include any male citizen of Athens. And you can see there with the Assembly of 500, that's the beginning of representative democracy. Romans vocabulary. An empire, a dominating nation with extensive territories and a powerful ruler. The Romans really did have an empire. They went, the Roman Empire went across Europe, and they had many territories, even into to northern Africa. Citizen assembly, one of the two houses in the Roman Republic, and this included the middle class male citizens. The others would be the patricians who were working in the Senate. So the citizen assembly is the more normal people. Plebeian, or sometimes you'll hear them, people refer to them as plebes, is a commoner or a member of the lower class in ancient Rome. And when it comes down to it, the majority of people in our society would pretty much be plebeians. Tribunes were leaders within the concilium plebis, which was the assembly of plebeians to give themselves some sort of authority is not the word I'm looking for. Advocacy, like they were kind of working for themselves to make themselves have a voice in their society. Patricians were the members of the elite, the rich and the important of ancient Rome. A governor was the leader of the empire, collecting taxes and sending them to Rome. It was more of a leader for the empire, not leader of the empire. I think I have the wrong article there. And I also put, because I'm a goober, also an evil dude in The Walking Dead. The Romans had battles with lots of people. It's how you become an empire. You battle lots of people and take their land. So here are a few that I really want you to try to remember. The Samnites were people from south central Italy, and they were involved in several wars with the Roman Republic until the 1st century BC. You don't have to remember all this, mainly just remember the names. The Celts, who referred to themselves as the Celts, but the Romans referred to them as the Gauls. They challenged Julius Caesar in the first century BC as well. The Etruscans were another Italian group. They were largely in the region we now know as Italy, and they eventually assimilated into Roman culture. The Etruscan culture is really kind of very cool. If you ever get to go visit Tuscany, it's you can still see the some of the buildings, like the lower part of the walls, are still old Etruscan walls, and they've built on top of them. And so there are walls that are, from the ancient world. It's pretty awesome. And the Carthaginians, that was the other side that was involved in the Punic Wars. They previously had an empire that was eventually ruled by Rome. And the Roman Republic. Who could vote in the Roman Republic? Free men with money and property. So the fortunate could vote. The houses. It was pretty much there were two official houses were the Senate and the Citizen Assembly. The Senate was the most powerful and it was full of the patricians, the upper class. The Citizens Assembly included middle class men, and then there was the advocacy group or an assembly formed by the plebeians to obtain some political rights, and that was the Concilium Plebeius. Feudalism. So some vocabulary from feudalism that will be in your test. There's the system of feudalism itself, which is the system of cooperation of the medieval era. It was based on the exchange of land and or service for protection, and it was strongest in England. So there are I did notice a couple people had different European countries on their study guides. So it was strongest in England. So make sure you know that. Feudal aid. So vassals would be ready to assist monetarily, such as in giving ransom in time of need, ransom money, or they would also help by sending their knights to help in whatever the king wanted them to help with. Um, the the fief was a large area of land ruled over by a lord in the medieval era, and so that was just that was pretty much what the manor was on, as well as all the surrounding lands around it that was included in that. Um, the knights were the able-bodied men hired by the vassal to protect the lord. Never served the lords. Sorry, never served. The knights never served the serfs. The knights only served the lords and anyone who the lords told them to serve. But never would that have been a serf. It wouldn't have been a peasant. They were definitely beneath the knights. The knights looked down on them. Serfs and peasants worked the land, um, and they worked the land for the Lord. In the beginning, they weren't attached to the land. They eventually became attached to the land, and they were never given land. You were pretty much born a serf and you died a serf. There's this I like these stories like the Knight's Tale movie that came out a long time ago, where you could see someone who was from lower class move up in society. That kind of upward mobility didn't come about until really the towns, and even after that, really. Towns were the first step towards that. King John was the ruler of England in the early 1200s, so you'll want to make sure you kind of keep that in your back pocket. He was the ruler during the kind of the height of feudalism. Decline of feudal society, part of that was because of the Crusades, and that expanded their understanding of the world. People who had never been out of Europe were going into Asia and seeing all these different things and fighting for their religion and bringing back all sorts of different items, which expanded the world not only of the people who went and fought, but also of the people who saw all of these things when they came back. The Crusades, you can almost say, like, sparked the beginning of exploration because people explored before that, like the Vikings, but the Crusades made people really curious about other cultures. That they became less self-centered and more outwardly. So they looked more outwards and saw that the world was much bigger than they thought. This all leads into the decline of feudal society because all of these new ideas and new things that have come back into these manors and villages, the peasants start being less tied to the manors. They move around, and they start accumulating wealth because of this. They don't work just the land and then give like keep a little bit of food and give the rest to the Lord. They're able to work the land and sell the food and keep money and accumulate some wealth. The rise of towns. Peasant mobility led to them settling in towns, and peasants started learning trades and feeling self-empowered. This really is another point when we start thinking of a sense of self growing in these people. They're not just like cogs in a machine. They are people, and they think about what they want and what else might be with might become of their lives than just working and being born, working, and dying. And the decline of nobility. This also came about from the Crusades because the peasants, due to the peasants' idea of self, nobles received less respect, and the peasants were less devoted to them. Once people started realizing that there was hope of upward mobility, and you weren't always stuck to be someone who's just working the land and working for someone else their whole life, you start realizing that just because someone's born with a title on their name doesn't make them any better than you. They're just more fortunate than you. The U.S. government. So this is a pretty big jump from feudalism to the U.S. government, and I could have gone over a bajillion things, but I really wanted to just keep it concise and to what's on the test. So the Federalist Papers were papers that were written in defense of the Constitution. They were written to help convince people to ratify the Constitution, mainly in the what would be called like the middle colonies, places like New York and around there. Men who helped write the Federalist Papers were John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison. Terms of office for U.S. politicians. This is another jump, sorry. There's not a lot of fluidity here. But the terms of office for U.S. politicians, our senators have 6-year terms, and their methods of election, they're elected in like a rolling cycle. So 1/3 of the senators are elected every 2 years, and then the next third, and then the next third. So every 2 years there's a Senate election, but it's not always going to be for the senators in your area, or our area. We're all in Idaho. And then the House of Representatives, they each have 2-year terms, and they're up for election every 2 years, or re-election. Fascism and Nazism. Fascist governments often arise out of an economic collapse. If this was more of a history class, I would go on and on about how Nazism came out of the economic devastation of World War II. So I shan't go into it too much, but it is part of what we're talking about, so I'll go into it a little bit because I am a history nerd. The examples are going to be Italy during World War II and Nazi Germany. Adolf Hitler came into power because people in Germany were so poor after World War I, having to pay back all the money and help restore the other societies that were damaged during World War I. At the end of World War I, it was ruled that Germany would give money to all of those other countries because of being like the troublemakers who were out there militarily trying to gain ground. But they ended up losing. So Germany had no money. They were so poor. Everyone was poor. And Hitler came up into power because he told everybody that there will be a chicken in every pot. You will all have a car. Volkswagen came out of this time because that means the people's wagon, the people's car. And it was to his whole rhetoric, his speeches were all to the purpose of them were all to empower people to get out of a bad situation, and he took that and ran with it and gained a lot of power because of it. Fascist governments often come out of economic collapse, and that is one perfect example. And fascist governments are often ruled by dictators. Hitler was a dictator, as well as Mussolini, who was in Italy during World War II. Personal liberties are highly restricted under fascist regimes. Some of these are cultural. People can't produce art the way they would want to. They definitely cannot use art to question the government or what's going on. Religion is hindered. If your religion is not in line with what the government wants to have happen, your religion will be removed, much like with the Jewish religion under Nazi Germany. Travel is limited. People can't necessarily go out, can't, come and go out of North Korea as they would like to. And that's another one where we could see a fascist leader. Um, and labor strikes. If people have a problem with their employment, they can't, as a group, have a group mentality and have a labor strike to help gain power. The government will just push it down. So Nazism, Hitler was the Chancellor of Germany before and during World War II. His government resembled fascism in that it controlled communication, military, and social life. Hitler aimed at what he called a pure race, and that was a lot of that was removing any European Jews. And he made children attend education programs, which was the Nazi training camp. It was the Hitler Youth. Um, Hitler organized concentration camps to detain and kill undesirable citizens, and this would be mostly the highest number, of course, is the European Jews, also homosexuals, gypsies, the disabled, people who he did not think fit in his perfect race idea. Hitler's Germany was part of the coalition of countries known as the Axis powers, who fought against the Allies in World War II. And these are the essay questions from for your test. These are questions you've pretty much already answered throughout the course of the unit, but I do still want you to rewrite them in your own words and show me that you understand them. That's the biggest thing with these. So in an essay of 100 words or more, identify at least 2 ways that the government of ancient Greece and Rome were similar to many governments of today. This is where you're going to talk about things like voting in representation or democracy. You can talk about how the differences. You can also highlight differences about how. Well, I guess not because that question doesn't really lead there. But I was going to say how then it was just men of power and how well even with. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm totally getting sidetracked in my brain. You can align the similarity with early U.S. and Greece and Rome because early U.S. it was just white men with power, with property could vote. So things like that. Totalitarian governments like the fascists in Italy and Nazis in Germany were very concerned with the cultivation of state power. In an essay of 150 words or more, identify at least 2 ways that totalitarian governments grow the power of the state and make sure to identify what must be sacrificed from the citizens in order to build this power. So this is really what you're going to talk about, the areas where the fascist government is controlling the people and what the people can't do in order to make the government stronger. That's what must be sacrificed from the citizens, their freedoms, and then talk about those freedoms. In an essay of 150 words or more, explain how feudalism worked. You're going to want to talk about different groups in feudal society, so all the different roles and how they cooperated, and then what each group got out of the arrangement. So even though the serfs led a pretty dismal life, if they were out on their own and had no land and had no protection, they could easily have just died of starvation or been killed. So the serfs got protection from working the land. So even the people at the lowest part of the food chain in feudal society got something out of it, even though it wasn't ideal. So I hope this helped. I hope you saw all of this and listened to my ramblings, and it helped solidify some of the ideas that we've discussed in this unit. Remember, I'm here to help you with your work. If you have any questions, let me know. And after you watch this, if you're using this for your live class, call me and let's talk about it. And that way you can turn it in and get credit. I look forward to talking to you. Have a great day.